Hi, this is McHenry Software. This is a quick review of how to use the path follower in McHenry Software. What we're seeing here is basically we have two cars, they're just random cars, and we picked a road with a couple of curves. We have both cars starting at the same place, and we have one at 45 and one at 35, and they both follow a certain path. How we created this is the steps I'm going to go through quickly, but before I'll just talk about the inputs to give you a good idea. Let's go ahead and pause that for a second. Of course, you can go out to the grid, which is here. I started up in the graphics in this one, 3D graphics, or in the input card editor on the from the graphics, we have this input. Now, of course, obviously you should know all of these inputs, but down here, the path follower are the 402, 403, 404, 404.1, and 405. These inputs I'm going to start from scratch just to show you how, but for right now, I'll tell you what these things are. Item 1 on 402, and I always want to mention if you hit F1 when you're in a help file, hit the F1 key, it brings up the instructions, information on the various inputs. We call them cards. I know they're lines, but that's old school. So first item is driver model path generator. We set it to 3, so it's both vehicle 1 and 2. If you only have one vehicle, you set it to 1, and it could be either vehicle 1 or vehicle 2 if you want to only have one following. Then we have the driver model, and I have had one driver model type, which is a wagon tongue steer. And I've had some people mention that it isn't really a driver model, it's just a path follower because we're not really trying to mimic a driver, but there is a neuromuscular filter and some other things. But I would more recommend using this to give you an idea of what steer is required to following a path for different speeds, etc. And then if you change the speed, it's very quick to do it again, but then manually put it in. You just basically can plot up the steer, etc. And I'll show you how you do that very quickly. And you can create a table, and then you can even run it at half-second increments or 0.2 of a second increments, so it gives you the numbers you need to input. So obviously we have first again the 3 for both vehicles, 1 for the wagon tongue, then 1 for neuromuscular, which is just basically make sure it doesn't instantly change it. It does it over a period of a second. And then the inputs we use are just the uh, inputs that have been used, the defaults. When you get this, it'll be zeros, but you just put in the numbers that are recommended in the input file. The next item is how many curve path descriptors. I just put in 6 because I knew it was a double curve. Put in how many points is 75. Next item is where is the initial start point. Generally, I start at the same point. Now, they're not exactly, and I guess I could actually change this to minus 121, so they're going to be both at exactly the same point. There we go. Now they're both the same. So you put the X, Y, and heading angle. How I moved them is when I brought in that drawing of the ground, you just move the car to the point where you think it starts, and then we create a path to follow the path, and we'll talk about that. Next item is going to be how many feet between points, and I just put 20. You can put as many as you want. Generally 10 or 20 feet is good. Then we basically say distance along path and radius. So at first we're going to do up to 20 feet, we're going to have a 0, which then makes it a infinite. Then at 20 feet, we're going to change to a 460 radius. And then at 510, we change from a 460 to 510 at minus 530. Now, you may see that these are the same distance. That's because there also is the ability to spiral. You could spiral between 510 and 600 from the positive to negative, etc., depending on the path of the roadway or if your actual roadway design has a spiral transition. That's why you don't have to have these the same, but if you do have them the same, then what it does, it'll run 460 up to that point and then change to minus 530 after that point, and then we just leave it at minus 530. The next card is 405, which is just when do we start the path follower, how many milliseconds or seconds between samplings, what is the distance of the probe. It's a wagon tongue, and we basically set it to the, if you at 45 and 35, it's about 40 mile an hour average. That's about 700 inches per second, so we set it to 700 inches. You can play with this. It's really how much noise you're going to get in the path follower following it. Then next is what is the average minimum error. Sometimes you may want to have it so it can go up to 10 or 12 or 15 inches of error and it doesn't apply any steering change. What's the maximum acceleration? What's the maximum, the next field is what's the maximum steer? velocity, and then basically 1 over whatever this value is here we use for p gain, and then 1 over that we do for q gain. Now, as I mentioned, we can look at the steer angles, and if we hit the chart function, you see that it brings up this chart. And so what this chart is showing you is that at 0 seconds it jumps to 2 degrees, it overshoots a little, then it comes back to about 1 degree for the 45 and 1.3 degrees or something. If you want to see what it actually is, you can see over here is there's view list. And you see that that shows you that it settles in at about, these are the numbers that you actually have. Now, you could also, with this, if you set your output time increment to every 1/10 of a second or 2/10 of a second, then it'll give you values that you can then input manually, so then you don't even have to mention you used a path follower. Again, this is for convenience. Now, going to overhead, if we go ahead and click on this and go to the overhead, you see what we have here is we have a, hopefully you can see this, we have a right steer followed by a left steer. Now we're going to go through how we created this. First item you would do, grid, but before we do that, what we're going to talk about is we went and got this scene with a, as you can see, it's a scene with a curving road. You could have brought in the elevation. This is 3D or 2D. I'm going to run these in 2D because it's just faster. And then when you're in 3D, I even recommend that when you're doing path followers, run it in 2D until you get the path looking pretty good, then go 3D because it takes, it's only maybe 30 seconds or a minute more, but why waste a minute waiting on a simulation when results are going to be similar. So we go ahead and we exit out. Let's go ahead and delete these and bring them back in. So we delete 402, delete 403, 404, 404, 405, and I'll show you how I did this from scratch. So first thing we're going to do is we go out here and we go 401, driver. Go out again, and at some point we're going to have multi-selection here just so you can go and grab a bunch of different cards, but 403, 404, then we're going to do 404 sequence 1 because we're going to need probably more than 4 descriptors of the path, and then last I'm going to go 405. So now first, obviously, we want to set, is it 1 or 2 cards? And again, up on the top here, as I'm moving this, you can see it says driver model generator, no path data are supplied, and it's whether it's vehicle 1, 2, or both vehicles. We're going to do both vehicles. We go ahead and say, yes, we want a wagon tongue. Yes, we want neuromuscular, and then we're just going to use the defaults that are listed up there on the top area that I just pointed out to you. Now for the next one, it's the number of path descriptors. We're going to say 6. Put number of points, 75. You can go up to 100. We can make that infinite, but right now that's probably more than adequate. Initial X position. Now what we do here is, and again I have to go up and look so I can see what the initial positions is. Minus 121, 342.8, and 49. Minus 121, minus 342.8, and 49. Make sure that's right. Yes. And then it asks how many distance between points. You can do 10 or 20. We'll go with 20. And then just to start, we're going to say first radius of curvature is 0. Distance that starts is we're going to say at 20 feet. So in other words, so you have a straight section for a little bit. Then we're going to go, let's just go 500. And that's at 20. That's going to start. And the reason you have to put in these both at the same is if you change that, you can have what's called a spiral transition. I think I mentioned that a few minutes ago. So then we'll just have 500 again for 1,000. And then we don't really have to put in the rest because it'll never get beyond that. Now the only thing for now, and then we're going to have more in a minute. Now in 405, we want to start at 0, 1/10 of a second. Length of probe is 40 and 45. We're going to set that at 700 inches. Error correction will make 0. Maximum acceptable acceleration, half g, 400 degrees per second, and then 0.001 and 0.0001 for those two. Now, other thing I recommend when you first are setting this up, just set that to 0. In other words, you're running a 0 simulation, which is just going to show you the path, because in our graphics, in both 2D graphics and 3D graphics, it will show you the path. So we go back to graphics, and now there's not going to be, well, there'll still be that path we had before, but now when I run it, and again, I recommend running it in 2D, you see how it shows the path. Now, that path looks a little too large a radius, so we're going to go here and change that from 500. Let's go ahead and change it down to about 450. Let's see how that goes. Again, you're just running the 2D. See how it just pops? Okay, that's not bad. The next question is, it might be a little bigger, and actually I think from the prior one I found it was about 460. And so 460. And now the question is, how long do we run it? And let's just say for starters, we say, let's just go for about 400 feet. And then we're going to, we know it's a negative steer after that, so minus 300 after that. And we go 400. And let's see how that works. Now you see, it shot off actually tangentially. So we're going to go ahead and check that again. So again, we got 460, and at 400, let's make this 450 instead of 400. And we go to minus 450, and I guess the thing we forgot to do is we should continue that at minus 300 up to 1,000 feet, let's just say. Now you notice we have too much radius coming back. We're not following, so let's go try again. That minus 300 is probably way too big, so let's make that minus 500 and minus 500. Still getting there, but I think we need this one to go a little bit farther because it looks like it goes to about here before it curves the other way. So that looks like a scale. I don't have, well, you know, a car. I guess that's one thing we have to add on to here is add a scale. Sorry about that. But let's go ahead and make that an additional 100 feet. So instead of at 450, let's make it 550. So again, the change is going to come in at 550. Now I see that was a little too much. So now let's try 510. And obviously, you tinker around with this and you'll get better at it. It's all a function of your scale. Usually having a scale in the picture around where your path is. That looks like a pretty good scale. So let's go ahead and change the time. Make it 13 seconds. And let's go ahead and run it in 2D. Just runs faster in 2D for the purposes right now. I'll run the last one in 3D. And now I had done an automatic zoom. Go ahead and hit here. Add. And we say there's our first. And we're going to move this to here. We add plus. And we move it along a little bit more. We're manually looking at this. And actually when you're playing, I guess I'm going to show you one other thing you can do. You see that we're following the path pretty nicely. So here we have that automatic path. Now you notice the two cars can start at the same place with that option. Oh, I guess that's, let me just point that out right now before I forget. I've mentioned this before, card 83 field 8. As you see, it says option to turn off collision interaction, so you can start two vehicles. A lot of times when you're doing single vehicle accidents, that's great because you can try a couple variations with each simulation run. And it doesn't really take much more time to run two as opposed to one. So there you have, that's basically how we run the path follower, how to create a path. Thank you for watching.